At 1:03 in the morning, I heard frantic knocking on my front door. There's something about late-night disturbances that instantly fills your stomach with dread. 26 years as a police officer had taught me that nothing good comes after midnight. I grabbed my service weapon from the bedside table, a habit I couldn't shake even 3 years into retirement, and made my way down the stairs. Through the peephole, I saw a hunched figure, face obscured by shadows. I tightened my grip on my weapon, took a deep breath, and opened the door. My heart stopped. My daughter, Megan, stood trembling on my porch, her blonde hair disheveled, mascara streaking down her cheeks. But what made me gasp was the blood, a thin crimson line trailing from her split bottom lip. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He hit me. Because of Amber." I felt the world shift beneath my feet. My Megan, my bright, beautiful girl. I pulled her into my arms as she collapsed against me, her body shaking with silent sobs. "I've got you," I murmured, leading her inside while scanning the darkness beyond my porch. No sign of Scott's black Audi. Good. I wasn't sure I could trust myself if I saw him now. In the kitchen light, the damage was worse than I'd first thought. Beyond her split lip, an angry red mark was darkening along her left cheekbone. I gathered ice in a dish towel, gently pressing it to her face as she winced. "Start from the beginning," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It was the same tone I'd used countless times while interviewing victims at crime scenes. Professional, calm, hiding. The rage building inside me. "I found text messages," Megan said, her eyes downcast. "Explicit ones. Between Scott and Amber Lane." Amber Lane, of course. The petite brunette who'd moved to Millfield last spring, whose flirtatious laugh could be heard at every neighborhood function. The woman who'd been making eyes at Scott for months while he pretended not to notice. When I confronted him, he denied it at first. Then he got angry, said I was paranoid, that I was suffocating him. Megan's voice caught. When I showed him the actual messages, he just snapped, said it was my fault, that if I'd been more exciting, more adventurous. She touched her lip gingerly. "He'd never done this before, Mom. Never. But I knew better. Physical abuse rarely starts with a punch. It begins with control, with isolation, with small cruelties that gradually become larger ones. How long has he been pulling away from you?" I asked quietly. Megan's silence told me everything. "You're staying here tonight," I said firmly. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out next steps." "I can't just leave him," she protested weakly. "Everyone in Millfield thinks we're perfect. His father is the mayor. My job at his company—" "Megan Elizabeth Whitmore," I interrupted, using her full name like I had when she was small. "You are not going back to a man who put his hands on you. Not tonight, not ever." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He'll come looking for me." "Let him try," I said, the steel in my voice unmistakable. As I led her upstairs to the guest bedroom, still decorated with her high school, achievements, I was already formulating a plan. Scott Holloway might have the town of Millfield in his pocket with his family name and charming smile, but he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd hurt my daughter. And retired police captain Karen Whitmore was about to remind everyone in this picture-perfect suburban town that appearances can be deceiving. After settling Megan in bed, with a mild sedative I kept for my occasional insomnia, I returned downstairs. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a fury so potent it made my vision blur. I poured myself a finger of bourbon and sat at my kitchen table, where I'd helped Megan with homework, celebrated birthdays, and planned her wedding to Scott 3 years ago. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew would answer at this ungodly hour. "Karen?" Detective Mike Ramirez answered groggily, my former partner, now serving as Millfield's head detective. "It's almost 2 in the morning. I need a favor, Mike," I said, my voice low. "It's about Megan." By the time I hung up, the first pieces were in place. Mike would quietly look into Scott's activities without tipping off the mayor or his influential family. Meanwhile, I had my own investigation to conduct. Because in Millfield, where garden club politics and country club memberships dictated social standing, the truth was a currency more valuable than money. And I was about to become very, very rich. As dawn broke, I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, staring at the photos I'd taken of Megan's injuries. Documentation, the first step in any case. 26 years on the force had taught me to be methodical, even when my heart was breaking. Upstairs, my daughter slept restlessly, occasionally crying out in her dreams. Each sound was like a knife twisting in my chest. I had failed to protect her, but I wouldn't fail to deliver justice. The Holloways had ruled Millfield for 3 generations. Mayor Richard Holloway and his perfect family lived in the largest house on Maple Drive, hosted the most lavish fundraisers, and donated generously to every charity in town. Their son Scott had followed the expected path: business degree, position at the family investment firm, marriage to my accomplished daughter. No one would believe he was capable of this. No one except me. My phone buzzed. A text from Scott. "Is Megan with you?" "We had a misunderstanding. I need to speak with her." A misunderstanding. As if a split lip and bruised face were something that happened by accident. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked to my home office and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. Inside was everything I'd accumulated during my career: contacts, favors owed, and knowledge of how systems really worked. I might be retired, but some tools never lose their edge. The annual Millfield Summer Barbecue was scheduled for this weekend at the community park. Everyone would be there, including Scott and undoubtedly Amber Lane. It would be the perfect stage. But first, I needed proof beyond Megan's injuries. Evidence that would make it impossible for the Holloways to sweep this under the rug with their influence and money. As I closed the drawer, I glanced at the family photo on my desk. Megan at her graduation, her father's arm around her shoulders, his police uniform crisp and proud. He'd died in the line of duty when Megan was 19, and not a day went by that I didn't miss him. "I'll handle this, John," I whispered to his image. "I promise." Because some monsters wear expensive suits and charming smiles, and some justice is delivered not in courtrooms, but in the court of public opinion. I just had to make sure I didn't become a monster myself in the process. I spent the next morning watching Megan sleep, remembering the tiny girl who once chased butterflies in our backyard, the determined teenager who decided at 15 that she wanted to be a marine biologist, then changed course in college to pursue business marketing, the confident young woman who'd stood beside Scott at the altar, love shining in her eyes while I pushed down my reservations about his controlling tendencies. When she finally woke around 11, her face had swollen, the bruise now a deep purple against her pale skin. "How bad is it?" she asked, avoiding the bathroom mirror. "It'll heal," I said, sitting beside her on the bed. "But we need to talk about what happens next." She tensed. "I'm not ready to make any decisions." "I'm not asking you to," I replied, keeping my voice gentle. "But Scott will be looking for you. Your phone has been buzzing all morning." Megan reached for it hesitantly, scrolling through what appeared to be dozens of messages. Her expression shifted from anxiety to confusion. "He's apologizing, says he doesn't know what came over him, that he loves me." She looked up at me. "Mom, what if it was just a terrible mistake? The familiar pattern. The violence, followed by remorse, followed by promises, followed inevitably by more violence. I'd seen the cycle play out countless times during my career. Megan, honey, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest," I said carefully. "Has Scott ever made you feel afraid before last night?" She stared at her hands. "Not physically, but he gets so angry sometimes. When dinner isn't ready, when I talk to male colleagues, when I want to visit you without him." She twisted her wedding ring. "He checks my phone, monitors my spending, says it's because he worries." Each word was another piece of evidence in the case against Scott Holloway. Control, isolation, financial monitoring, the precursors to physical abuse. "And Amber?" I asked. "She started at Scott's firm 6 months ago. Everyone noticed how he changed around her, laughing louder, standing closer. I tried to ignore it." Megan's voice hardened. "At the Pattersons' dinner party last month, I walked in on them in the study. They weren't doing anything, but they jumped apart when I entered. Scott said they were discussing a client." "And you believed him?" I wanted to. Tears welled in her eyes. It's easier to believe the lie when the truth hurts too much. I nodded, remembering how John and I had struggled during his darkest days on the force, when the job nearly broke him. Sometimes loving someone meant accepting uncomfortable truths. "You don't have to decide anything today," I said. "But I want you to see a doctor. We need to document your injuries." "Mom? No." Panic flashed in her eyes. "Everyone will know." "Not everyone. Just Dr. Martinez. She was my physician before she was yours, and she knows how to be discreet." I squeezed her hand. "This isn't about public humiliation, Megan. It's about protecting yourself." After some resistance, she agreed. While she showered, I made the appointment and then called Mike. "What have you found?" I asked without preamble when he picked up. "Scott Holloway isn't as squeaky clean as his family pretends," Mike replied. "He's been spotted multiple times with Amber Lane outside of work hours. Nothing conclusive, but enough to raise eyebrows." "I need surveillance," I said. "Not official, just friendly observation." Mike's hesitation was audible. "Karen, you know I can't authorize resources for personal—" "Remember Peachtree Road?" I interrupted. The case that nearly derailed Mike's career before I stepped in. Silence. Then, "I'll see what I can do. Unofficially. That's all I'm asking." After hanging up, I prepared a light breakfast that Megan barely touched. We drove to Dr. Martinez's office in silence, Megan wearing large sunglasses despite the cloudy day. The examination was brief, but thorough. Dr. Martinez documented everything, her expression professionally neutral even as anger flashed in her eyes. "I'm giving you a mild painkiller for the discomfort," she told Megan, "and I strongly recommend you speak with someone about what happened." "I'm speaking with my mother," Megan replied defensively. Dr. Martinez nodded. "Karen is an excellent resource, but sometimes a professional perspective can help." She handed Megan a card. "This therapist specializes in domestic situations. Everything is confidential." In the car afterward, Megan stared out the window. "I keep thinking about what people will say," she finally murmured. "The Holloways are Millfield royalty. I'm just the cop's daughter who married above her station." "Above your station?" I echoed incredulously. "Megan, you graduated summa cum laude. You built the marketing department at Holloway Investments from the ground up. Scott is lucky to have you, not the other way around." "That's not how the town sees it," she said quietly. "Everyone acts like I won some prize when Scott chose me." The implications of her words stung. I'd raised Megan to be independent, strong-minded. How had she come to believe her worth was tied to her husband's social status? When we returned home, Scott's black Audi was parked in my driveway. "Don't get out," I instructed, my hand on Megan's arm. "I'll handle this." "Mom, please don't make a scene," she pleaded. "I never make scenes," I replied calmly. "I resolve situations." Scott stood on my porch, immaculately dressed in a tailored gray suit, a bouquet of roses in his hand, the perfect picture of a contrite husband. When he saw me approaching alone, his expression shifted from practiced remorse to irritation. "Karen," he greeted me stiffly, "I need to speak with my wife." "Not today, Scott." I positioned myself between him and the door. "With all due respect, this is between Megan and me." His voice lowered. "Couples have disagreements. It's not unusual." "Disagreements don't leave marks," I replied, matching his quiet tone but infusing it with steel. "What you did wasn't a disagreement. It was a crime." His facade cracked for just a moment, revealing the rage beneath. "Be careful, Karen. Making accusations without proof is dangerous. I have all the proof I need." I stepped closer. "And if you ever touch my daughter again, I will use every contact I've made in 26 years of law enforcement to ensure you face consequences. Is that clear?" Scott's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Crystal, but I think you're forgetting who has influence in this town." "My father is the mayor. Yes, I'm well aware." I crossed my arms. "But even mayors can't bury certain scandals, especially when there's documentation." Uncertainty flickered across his face. "Good. Let him wonder what evidence I might have." "Just let me speak with Megan," he said, switching tactics. 5 minutes. When she's ready to talk to you, she'll call." "You're manipulating her," he accused, turning her against me. I almost laughed. "You did that all by yourself, Scott." He placed the roses on the porch bench, his movements deliberate. "Tell Megan I love her, and that I'm sorry for losing my temper. It won't happen again." "You're right about that," I agreed. As he walked back to his car, I noticed Mrs. Peterson watering her plants across the street, watching our interaction with undisguised curiosity. The Millfield grapevine would be buzzing by dinner. Perfect. Because the Holloways might control the town's politics and finances, but gossip was a currency that circulated beyond their reach, and I was about to make a significant investment. After Scott left, I returned to the car where Megan waited, her face pale. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice small. "The usual, that he's sorry, that he loves you." I started the engine. "That it won't happen again." Megan stared at the roses on the porch. "And you don't believe him, do you?" I countered gently. She looked away, which was answer enough. That afternoon, I made coffee while Megan rested upstairs. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "We need to talk. Not on the phone. Usual spot. 30 minutes? Our usual spot was a bench, overlooking the lake at Millfield Park, far enough from joggers and dog walkers to have private conversations. I left a note for Megan and drove there, finding Mike already waiting, his weathered face grim. "This is worse than we thought," he said without preamble, handing me a manila envelope. "One of my officers spotted Scott and Amber at the Golden Pine Motel yesterday afternoon. I had him pull security footage from the past month." I opened the envelope. Inside were time-stamped photos showing Scott and Amber entering room 14 on multiple occasions. "That's not all," Mike continued. "I ran a background check on Amber Lane. Her real name is Amber Holloway. She's Scott's cousin from his mother's side, visiting from Chicago." I nearly dropped the envelope. His cousin? Then why? My guess? "They're not having an affair. They're planning something." The pieces began falling into place. "Financial?" Mike nodded. "Scott's been moving company funds into offshore accounts. Small amounts to avoid detection, but it adds up." "How do you know this?" "Let's just say the new IT guy at Holloway Investments owes me a favor." Mike looked uncomfortable. "Karen, if Mayor Holloway discovers I'm investigating his son without cause—" "There is cause," I interrupted, showing him the photos of Megan's injuries on my phone. "Domestic violence." Mike's expression darkened. "Has she filed a report?" "Not yet. She's afraid." "Of Scott?" "Of losing everything. Her job, her standing in town." I sighed. "Of admitting she made a mistake marrying him." Mike was silent for a moment. "The annual barbecue is this weekend. Every important person in Millfield will be there. Including the Holloways," I said, an idea forming. "And Amber." "What are you thinking?" "That the truth should be as public as the lies have been." I met his gaze. "I need one more favor. Access to the police database. Just for an hour." "Karen." "It's for Megan, Mike." He hesitated, then nodded. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. The station will be quiet." I spent the rest of the day helping Megan gather essential items from her house while Scott was at work. We moved quickly, taking only what she couldn't live without: clothes, personal documents, photos from before her marriage. "What about Mr. Whiskers?" she asked, referring to the gray tabby Scott had given her for their first anniversary. "Bring him," I said. Scott never liked that cat anyway. Back at my house, I watched Megan set up the guest room with her belongings, creating a small sanctuary for herself. Mr. Whiskers explored his new territory, sniffing corners and marking furniture with his scent. "It feels strange," Megan confessed as we ate dinner. "Like I'm 17 again, living under your roof. Except now you can drink wine with dinner," I replied, pouring her another glass. "And I don't have to check your homework." She smiled faintly. "Scott called while we were at the house, left a voicemail." "Did you listen to it?" She nodded. "He said his father is expecting us at the barbecue, that people will talk if we don't show up together." "Let them talk," I said firmly. "It's not that simple, Mom. I work for his family's company. My entire professional reputation." "Your professional reputation is based on your skills and accomplishments," I interrupted. "Not on being Scott's wife." "You don't understand how Millfield works," she said, frustration edging her voice. "The Holloways own half the commercial real estate in town. Mayor Holloway sits on the board of every major organization. If they turn against me, then you'll find opportunities elsewhere," I said. "You're brilliant, Megan. Any company would be lucky to have you. It's not just about the job." Her voice broke. "It's about failing. Everyone told me how perfect Scott was, how fortunate I was. Even you had doubts when we got engaged." I reached across the table for her hand. "I had doubts about him, not you. Never you." That night, I sat in my office reviewing the photos from Mike, connecting them with what I knew about Scott's behavior. The affair story had been a convenient cover, but the truth was potentially more damaging: financial fraud involving family members. I opened my laptop and began compiling everything: the photos of Megan's injuries, the motel footage, the information about Amber's true identity. I created a timeline, noting how Scott's controlling behavior had escalated alongside his secret meetings. Around midnight, my phone rang. The screen showed Scott's number. I answered but said nothing. "I know what you're doing, Karen." His voice was calm, measured. "Trying to turn my wife against me, digging into my personal affairs. Assaulting my daughter made it my business," I replied coolly. "That was regrettable. I lost my temper. But we both know marriages have rough patches." "Is that what you call it, a rough patch?" "Megan and I need to work this out privately." Your interference isn't helpful. Then you shouldn't have sent her to my door with a split lip. A pause. My father is hosting a private dinner tomorrow night. Family only. I'd like Megan to attend. That's her decision. And sure, she makes the right one. His tone hardened. Remember, Karen, I can make things very difficult for her if this becomes messy. Are you threatening my daughter? I'm stating facts. Her career, her social standing, her financial security, all tied to the Holloway name. A pause. It would be a shame to see her lose everything over one misunderstanding. The call ended, leaving me seething. Fought the urge to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I added attempted intimidation to my growing file. The next morning, I arrived at the police station at 8 sharp. Mike led me to his office, closing the blinds before logging into the system. 1 hour, he reminded me, and I know nothing about this. I nodded, fingers flying across the keyboard as I searched for everything on Amber. Lane, Holloway, and Scott. The database confirmed Mike's information. Amber was indeed Scott's cousin, with a history of minor financial fraud charges in Chicago that had mysteriously disappeared. More concerning were the sealed records from Scott's college years, a domestic violence complaint filed by a former girlfriend, later withdrawn. The pattern was established years before he met my daughter. I printed what I needed and thanked Mike, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with his role in my investigation. "What are you planning, Karen?" he asked as I gathered my documents. "Justice," I replied simply. "The kind that won't be found in a courtroom." "Be careful," he warned. "The Holloways don't respond well to threats." Neither do I. When I returned home, Megan was in the kitchen, making tea, her phone buzzing repeatedly on the counter. She glanced at it, then turned it face down. "Scott?" I guessed. She nodded. "And his mother. Apparently there's a family dinner tonight." She looked at me uncertainly. "Part of me wants to go, to pretend everything is normal. And the other part is terrified of being alone with them." She touched her bruise, now yellowing at the edges. "What would you do?" I chose my words carefully. I'd consider my options, remembering that each choice sets a precedent for how I allow others to treat me. Megan was silent for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and texted something brief before setting it down again. "I told them I'm not feeling well," she said, a new resolve in her voice. "That I'll see them at the barbecue on Boys. Saturday." Pride swelled in my chest. That's a perfectly reasonable response. Scott won't see it that way. Scott's perspective is no longer your primary concern, I reminded her gently. She nodded, then gestured to the folder under my arm. "What's that?" "Insurance," I replied, tucking it into my desk drawer. "For Saturday. Because at the Millfield summer barbecue, with the entire town as witnesses, Scott Holloway's carefully constructed facade would finally crumble, and Megan would discover she was stronger than she'd ever imagined." Friday arrived with dark clouds threatening rain, fitting weather for the storm I was preparing to unleash. I spent the morning finalizing my evidence file while Megan spoke with Dr. Martinez's recommended therapist over the phone, her voice low and hesitant at first, then gradually gaining strength. When she emerged from the guest room, something had shifted in her demeanor. She stood straighter, her eyes clearer. "The therapist thinks I should consider a restraining order," she said, pouring herself coffee. "She's right," I agreed cautiously, not wanting to push. "I'm not ready for that yet." Megan stirred her coffee methodically. "But I am ready to tell Scott I won't be returning home. Not immediately, anyway. Progress. Small steps toward reclaiming her power. He called while I was talking to the therapist," she continued. "Left a message saying he's withdrawn cash for me, that I should come home and we can discuss our future." "Withdrawn cash?" I repeated, alarm bells ringing. "From your joint account?" "Presumably." She frowned at my expression. "What's wrong? May I see your banking app?" Megan opened it on her phone, and my suspicions were confirmed. Their joint savings account, which had contained over $50,000 the last time she checked, now showed a balance of $2,300. "He's emptied it," she whispered, color draining from her face. "Why would he?" "To control you," I replied, restraining my anger. "Financial. Manipulation is a common tactic. But that's our house down payment fund. We've been saving for years." I added financial abuse to my mental list of Scott's transgressions. "Call the bank. See what transactions have been made." While Megan spoke with the bank representative, I texted Mike. "Scott emptied joint accounts. Pattern consistent with preparation to flee?" His response was immediate. "Possible. We'll monitor airport, train station." Megan hung up, her expression stunned. "Multiple withdrawals over the past 3 weeks. The The banker said Scott claimed we were making an investment opportunity that required cash. Did you authorize this? No. I never even knew about it. She ran a hand through her hair. God, how could I be so oblivious? I handle marketing, not finances, so I trusted him with our accounts, but still, this isn't your fault, I said firmly. Abusers are experts at compartmentalizing their lives. What do we do now? We document this alongside everything else. I hesitated. Megan, with this new information, would you consider filing a police report? Financial fraud is easier to prove than he said she said domestic violence. She twisted her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed developing since her arrival. Let me think about it. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Megan tensed, but I checked the security camera I'd installed years ago and saw Mayor Richard Holloway standing on my porch, his silver hair impeccable despite the humid day. It's your father-in-law, I told Megan. Do you want to see him? She hesitated, then nodded. But stay with me. I opened the door to find Richard Holloway looking every inch the distinguished public servant in his tailored navy suit, an expression of practiced concern on his face. Karen, he greeted me with a nod. Is my daughter-in-law available? She's here, I confirmed, not moving from the doorway. But whether she's available depends on her, not me. Richard's smile, I tightened. Always the protector, aren't you? Even in retirement. Some instincts never fade. Megan appeared beside me. It's okay, Mom. We can talk in the living room. I stepped aside, watching Richard's eyes widen slightly at Megan's visible bruise before he schooled his features back to neutrality. We sat in my living room, an uncomfortable triangle of tension. Megan, my dear, Richard began, his voice gentle. Scott is devastated. He hasn't been himself. Devastated that he hit her, or devastated that she left? I asked bluntly. Richard shot me an irritated glance. Family matters are complicated, Karen. I'm sure you understand that. What I understand is assault. Mom, Megan warned quietly. She turned to her father-in-law. Richard, I appreciate your concern, but I need time. Of course, he agreed smoothly. Time to heal, to think clearly without outside influence. His gaze flickered to me. However, I'm concerned about appearances. The barbecue tomorrow. Appearances, I echoed. That's your priority? Not your daughter-in-law's safety? Karen, he began. No, let me answer, Megan interrupted, surprising us both. I'll be at the barbecue, Richard. But not with Scott. Richard's diplomatic mask slipped. Megan, consider what you're doing. The Holloway name carries weight in Millfield, weight that benefits you professionally. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. A reality check, he countered. Scott made a mistake. A serious one, yes, but not unforgivable. In our family, we handle difficulties privately. Like you handled Scott's incident in college, I asked, watching his expression carefully. Richard went very still. I don't know what you're referring to. I think you do. A complaint filed by Elizabeth Chen, later withdrawn after a substantial donation to her family's business. The mayor's face hardened. You've been digging into ancient history. Pattern recognition is part of police training, I replied. And your son has an established pattern. Richard stood, straightening his jacket. Megan, I came here out of concern for you and for my son's marriage. I hope you'll reconsider your position before taking actions that cannot be undone. I'm not the one who took irreversible action, Megan replied, her voice steady. Scott did that when he struck me. After Richard left, Megan collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally drained. That was harder than I expected. You did wonderfully, I assured her, sitting beside her. Stood your ground. He's right about one thing, she said quietly. Once this becomes public, there's no going back. The Holloways will close ranks. I'll lose my job, my friends. You'll find new ones, I interrupted gently. Better ones who value you for yourself, not your connection to an inside, influential family. Easy to say when you're not starting over at 30. I started over at 48 when your father died, I reminded her. Changed apartments, moved to a new town, built a life without the person I thought I'd grow old with. I took her hand. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most necessary. Megan's phone buzzed again. Scott, for the 12th time that day. She silenced it without looking. Progress. That evening, we reviewed my evidence file together. Megan's expression grew increasingly troubled as she absorbed the extent of Scott's deception. The financial fraud, the secret meetings with his cousin, the previous domestic violence incident. I feel so stupid, she whispered, so completely blindsided. That's by design, I explained. Abusers isolate their victims, create dependency, then gradually reveal their true nature once the victim feels trapped. I wasn't isolated, she protested. I saw you regularly, had friends. When was the last time you saw Jennifer? I asked, referring to her best friend from college. Megan thought for a moment. Last Christmas? No, Thanksgiving. And before that? She fell silent, realizing the pattern. He always had reasons why we couldn't meet up. Work events, family obligations. Classic isolation tactics, I confirmed. Subtle enough that you don't notice until you're looking back. As we prepared for bed, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm that had threatened all day was finally breaking, rain lashing against the windows as wind bent the trees in my yard. What exactly? Are you planning for tomorrow? Megan asked, pausing in the hallway between our rooms. Justice, I replied. Public, undeniable justice. She studied my face. Will it hurt? Truth often does. I'm scared, she admitted, but also relieved, like something heavy is finally being lifted. I hugged her, this daughter who had my stubbornness and her father's compassion. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging. Later, alone in my room, I made final preparations for the barbecue. I printed copies of key documents, organized photos, and composed a brief, factual narrative that connected all the evidence. No embellishment needed. The truth was damning enough. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Security camera at train station shows Scott purchasing tickets for Sunday. 2 passengers. So, he was planning to run with Amber after the barbecue, leaving Megan with an empty bank account and a shattered reputation. Not if I had anything to say about it. Outside, lightning illuminated my bedroom in brief, harsh flashes. The storm was directly overhead now, a fitting backdrop to the calm determination settling over me. Tomorrow, at precisely 2 p.m., when Mayor Holloway made his traditional barbecue speech, Millfield would learn exactly what kind of man Scott Holloway really was, and Megan would take the first step toward reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. The thunder that followed seemed to seal my promise. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, as if the universe had decided Millfield deserved perfect weather for its annual barbecue. I woke, early, reviewing my evidence one final time while Megan slept. The documentation was meticulous. Photos of her injuries, bank statements showing the drained accounts, security footage of Scott and Amber at the motel, and the sealed records of Scott's previous violence. When Megan finally emerged from the guest room around 9, she looked more rested than she had in days. Mr. Whiskers trailed behind her, rubbing against her legs as she poured coffee. I've been thinking, she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, about what happens after today. What have you decided? I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. I want a divorce. The words were firm, decisive. Regardless of what happens at the barbecue, I can't stay with him. Pride swelled in my chest. That's a significant decision. It's the only decision. She stirred her coffee absently. I keep asking myself when I became this person, this woman who accepts lies and control and violence. Her voice caught on the word. That's not who you raised me to be. We sometimes accept treatment we don't deserve because we're afraid of the alternative, I said gently, especially when leaving means losing. Not just a partner, but an entire life you've built. The life was built on lies, she replied, a new hardness in her voice. I see that now. By 11, we were preparing for the barbecue. Megan chose a simple sundress that revealed her fading bruises. A deliberate choice, I realized. No more hiding. Are you sure about this? I asked as she applied minimal makeup, leaving the yellowing mark on her cheekbone visible. I'm done pretending, she replied, meeting my eyes in the mirror. If the Holloways want to talk about appearances, let's give them something real to look at. We arrived at Millfield Park just after noon. The annual barbecue was the town's biggest social event. Red, white, and blue bunting adorned the pavilion. Grills sizzled with burgers and hot dogs, and children raced across the grass while adults mingled, plastic cups of beer or lemonade in hand. As we walked toward the gathering, I noted how conversations paused, heads turned. News of Megan's temporary relocation to my house had clearly spread. Some glances were curious, others concerned. A few were openly judgmental. Patricia Winters, the town's unofficial gossip coordinator, intercepted us before we'd gone. 20 feet. Megan, darling, she exclaimed, air kissing both cheeks while her eyes cataloged every detail of my daughter's appearance. "We've missed you at yoga this week." "I've been taking some personal time," Megan replied smoothly. Patricia's gaze lingered on the visible bruise. "Oh my, what happened there?" "Ask Scott," Megan said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "He's becoming quite handy." Patricia blinked, processing the implication. "Well," she finally managed, "isn't that... I should check on the dessert table." She scurried away, and I squeezed Megan's hand. "You okay?" "Better than I expected," she said, a small smile playing at her lips. "There's something freeing about not keeping secrets anymore." We made our way through the crowd, accepting condiments and small talk in equal measure. I kept my evidence folder tucked under my arm, watching as Scott and his parents worked the gathering from the opposite side of the park. They hadn't spotted us yet, but it was only a matter of time. At 1:45, Mike appeared at my elbow, his expression grim. "Karen, are you sure about this? The Holloways won't take this lying down." "I'm counting." "On it," I replied. "Did you bring what I asked for?" He nodded, discreetly passing me a small digital recorder. "Audio only, nothing official." "Perfect." I slipped it into my pocket. "Consider yourself an observer from this point on." Plausible deniability. At precisely 2 eggs, Mayor Holloway tapped a microphone set up near the pavilion. The feedback whine cut through the chatter, drawing everyone's attention. "Friends and neighbors," he began, his politician's smile dazzling in the afternoon sun. "Welcome to Millfield's 35th annual summer barbecue." Applause rippled through the crowd. I positioned myself near the edge of the gathering, Megan at my side as Richard launched into his usual speech about community and tradition. And of course, none of this would be possible without the support of my wonderful family, he continued, gesturing to his wife, Elizabeth, and to Scott, who stood slightly apart, scanning the crowd until his gaze locked on Megan. His expression shifted from surprise to anger to calculation in the space of seconds. He whispered something to a woman beside him, Amber, I realized, before plastering on a smile and starting toward us. "Stay close," I murmured to Megan. "It's almost time." Mayor Holloway was concluding his speech. Proud tradition of family values and community support. "Speaking of family values," I called out, stepping forward with my folder, "I'd like to address something important." The mayor faltered, confusion crossing his face as he recognized me. "Karen, this isn't really the appropriate..." "On the contrary, I..." replied, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet park. "This is exactly the right venue to discuss how the Holloway family treats the women in their lives." Scott froze midway through the crowd. I saw him exchange a look with his father. Panic meeting warning. "My daughter, Megan Holloway, came to my door at 1 a.m. 3 days ago," I continued, opening my folder. "With these injuries." I held up the enlarged photos of Megan's split lip and bruised face. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Inflicted by her husband, Scott Holloway, when she confronted him about his secret meetings with this woman. I displayed the motel security footage showing Scott and Amber, who, interestingly enough, isn't just his mistress. She's his cousin, Amber Holloway, visiting from Chicago under an assumed name. The whispers intensified. Mayor Holloway stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Karen, that's enough. These are private family matters." "Private? Like the domestic violence complaint filed against Scott during college?" I countered. "The one that mysteriously disappeared after a donation to the victim's family business? Or private like the $50,000 Scott has withdrawn from his and Megan's joint accounts over the past 3 weeks?" Scott finally found his voice. "Megan, don't listen to her. Your mother is twisting everything." "Am I twisting this?" Megan asked, stepping forward to stand beside me. She pointed to her bruised cheek. "Did I imagine your fist connecting with my face? Did I hallucinate the text messages between you and Amber?" Scott looked desperately toward his father, who was attempting to regain control of the situation. "Folks, please," the mayor called out. "This is clearly a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I interrupted, my voice steel. "Your son assaulted my daughter. He's been systematically draining their accounts while planning to leave town with his cousin tomorrow." I held up the train tickets Mike had discovered. 2 one-way tickets to Chicago, purchased in cash. The crowd had grown completely silent, all pretense of casual socializing abandoned. Every eye was fixed on the unfolding drama. Scott made one last desperate attempt. "Megan, baby, please, come home. We can work this out privately." "There's nothing to work out," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm filing for..." divorce, and a restraining order. You can't be serious, he sputtered. After everything my family has done for you? Your career, your standing in this town, are nothing compared to my dignity and safety, Megan finished. She removed her wedding ring and held it out to him. You can have this back. I don't want anything else from you. As Scott stared at the offered ring, his father marched toward us, fury etched in every line of his face. You've made a serious mistake, Karen, he growled, low enough that only those closest could hear. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I smiled, reaching into my pocket to retrieve the recorder. Actually, I do. And I've just added threatening a former police officer to your list of problems. The mayor blanched, suddenly aware of the, very public corner he'd backed himself into. Justice, I thought, watching the mighty Holloway family squirm under the collective gaze of the town they'd manipulated for so long. It doesn't always arrive in a courtroom. The explosion at the Millfield barbecue reverberated through town like a shockwave. Within hours, the carefully constructed facade of the Holloway family began to crumble as more details emerged. Mike called that evening to report that Scott and Amber had been detained at the train station attempting to leave town with nearly $40,000 in cash, the bulk of Megan's missing savings. Mayor Holloway was conspicuously absent from the emergency town council meeting called to address the situation, his office citing a family emergency. This isn't over, I warned Megan as we sat on my back porch that night, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. The Holloways still have influence. They'll try to spin this. Let them try, she replied, sipping her tea. I have the truth, and apparently that's more powerful than I realized. The truth had indeed proved potent. By Sunday morning, Megan had received calls from 3 of her colleagues at Holloway Investments, offering support and information about Scott's financial manipulations. By Sunday afternoon, 2 other women had contacted Mike regarding past incidents with Scott that they'd been too intimidated to report. The protective bubble around the Holloway men was dissolving, one revelation at a time. On Monday, Elizabeth Holloway, Scott's mother and the mayor's wife of 35 years, appeared at my door, her normally perfect appearance showing signs of strain. May I speak with Megan? She asked, her voice brittle. That's up to her, I replied, leaving the decision to my daughter. Megan agreed to a brief conversation in the living room. I stayed within earshot in the kitchen, ready to intervene if necessary. I didn't know, Elizabeth said after an uncomfortable silence. About Scott's behavior. Richard always handled any problems with him. Her mouth twisted on the word. I told myself it was just youthful indiscretion, that he'd grow out of it once he settled down. With me as the settling influence? Megan asked quietly. Elizabeth had the grace to look ashamed. I suppose that was the hope, yes. You were always so grounded, responsible, useful, Megan supplied. Until I wasn't. I want you to know I've frozen the family accounts, Elizabeth continued. Richard and Scott won't have access to additional funds to fight you in court. She reached for her purse, withdrawing an envelope. This is a cashier's check for the money Scott took from your joint accounts. It doesn't fix anything, but it's a start. Megan accepted the envelope without opening it. Thank you. But why are you doing this? Because I've spent 35 years looking the other way, Elizabeth replied, a new resolve in her voice, pretending not to see things that were right in front of me. I'm done pretending. After she left, Megan handed me the envelope. $50,000, she confirmed after I examined the check. Exactly what was missing. Elizabeth is covering for them, I noted. Damage control. Or maybe she's finally taking a stand, Megan suggested. Either way, it gives me options. Those options expanded throughout the week. Mike secured a temporary restraining order against Scott, who had been charged with domestic assault and financial fraud. Mayor Holloway announced an indefinite leave of absence, citing health concerns. Holloway Investments appointed an interim CEO as rumors of a financial audit circulated. The town's reaction was mixed. Some longtime Holloway supporters maintained that Megan and I had orchestrated a character assassination. Others, particularly women who had experienced the family's manipulations firsthand, offered quiet solidarity. Mrs. Peterson brought over a casserole. It's about time someone stood up to them, she confided, glancing around as if the Holloways might be listening. They foreclosed on my sister's house during her cancer treatments, even after she'd been banking with them for 30 years. Jennifer Miller, Megan's high school friend whom Scott had gradually edged out of her life, called from Seattle. They spoke for hours, rebuilding bridges that had been systematically dismantled. It's strange, Megan remarked after hanging up. I keep discovering parts of myself that I'd forgotten existed. Friendships, interests, opinions that Scott didn't approve of. So I buried them. That's how control works, I explained. It's rarely one dramatic moment. It's 1,000 tiny compromises until you can't remember who you were before. On Thursday, Megan received an unexpected job offer from a marketing firm in Burlington, the city 30 miles from Millfield. The owner had been impressed by her portfolio and her courage in standing up to the Holloways. It would mean commuting, she said, considering the offer. Or moving. What do you want to do? I asked, careful not to influence her decision. She looked around my house, her temporary sanctuary, that still held echoes of her childhood. I think I need my own space. Not tied to Scott. Not tied to my childhood. Something that's just mine. Pride swelled in my chest. This was the independence I'd always hoped she'd maintain. By the following Tuesday, 10 days after the barbecue confrontation, Megan had secured a small apartment in Burlington, transferred her portion of the restored savings to a new bank, and filed formal divorce papers with the help of Miriam Chen, ironically the sister of Scott's college girlfriend who had withdrawn her complaint years earlier. Poetic justice, Miriam had commented when taking the case. The morning Megan was preparing to move into her new apartment, we sat at my kitchen table one last time over coffee. I've been thinking about what you said that first night, she mused. About monsters wearing expensive suits and charming smiles. It's true, I replied. The most dangerous predators are the ones who look perfectly safe. But there's something else I've realized, she continued. The opposite is also true. Heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry badges anymore. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Sometimes, they're just stubborn retired police captains who refuse to look the other way. I smiled, thinking of how far we'd come in less than 2 weeks. I'm not a hero, Megan. I'm just a mother who loves her daughter. That's what makes you heroic, she insisted. You saw the truth when everyone else was dazzled by the Holloway name and money. You taught me that my worth isn't tied to who I married or what social circles I move in. You always knew that, I countered. You just forgot for a while. As we loaded the last of her belongings into her car, including Mr. Whiskers and his carrier, meowing protests about the disruption, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in Megan's resilience, satisfaction that the Holloways were finally facing consequences, worry about the challenges still ahead, but mostly relief that my daughter was reclaiming her life. I'll call when I'm settled, she promised, hugging me tightly before sliding into the driver's seat. You'd better, I replied, blinking back unexpected tears. And remember, my door is always open. I know, she said, starting the engine, but I think it's time I started opening my own doors. I watched her drive away, her car growing smaller until it turned the corner and disappeared from sight. The neighborhood seemed quieter without her presence, but I felt a sense of rightness about her departure. 3 days later, Mike invited me to coffee at Millfield's only decent cafe. He slid a manila envelope across the table as soon as I sat down. What's this? I asked, recognizing the official Millfield Police Department. Seal. Job offer, he replied, a half-smile tugging at his mouth. Victim Advocacy Coordinator. New position created by the interim mayor. 20 hours a week, decent pay, complete independence from departmental politics. Interim mayor? This was news to me. Elizabeth Holloway, he confirmed. Appointed yesterday after Richard officially resigned for health and personal reasons. She's cleaning house, Karen, and she specifically requested you for this role. I opened the envelope skeptically, scanning the official offer. The position would involve working with victims of domestic violence and financial abuse, providing resources and guidance through the legal system that so often failed them. Why me? I wondered aloud. Because you stood up when it would have been easier to stay quiet, Mike said simply. Because you reminded this town what justice actually looks like. I thought about it over the next few days. About the other women like Megan, trapped in situations they couldn't see clearly or escape easily. About the power structures in small towns that enabled abusers while silencing victims. When I finally accepted the position, it wasn't for the money or the status. It was because I understood something fundamental. Sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or laws or badges. Sometimes it comes from one person willing to speak truth in a public square. Consequences be damned. My first official day coincided with Scott Holloway's plea hearing. He accepted a deal, probation, mandatory counseling, and financial restitution, in exchange for avoiding jail time. Some in town considered it too lenient, but Megan was satisfied. "I don't need him punished," she told me during our weekly dinner at her new apartment. "I just needed the truth acknowledged, for everyone to see who he really is." "And who you really are," I added. She nodded, a new confidence in her posture. That too. As I drove home that night, I thought about monsters and heroes, truth, and justice. About how quickly a life could change, for worse or for better, depending on who was willing to stand beside you when it mattered most. And I realized that sometimes, the most powerful weapon against darkness isn't a gun or a badge or even the law. It's simply the courage to turn on the light. 6 months after the Millfield barbecue that had changed everything, I stood in my backyard on an unseasonably warm spring afternoon, arranging chairs for Megan's housewarming party. She had recently purchased a small bungalow on the outskirts of Burlington. Nothing fancy, but entirely hers, bought with her own money and in her own name. "Need help with those?" Mike asked, appearing with a cooler of drinks. Our relationship had evolved over the past months, transitioning from former colleagues to something more personal, though we were taking things slowly. Both of us had learned the hard way that solid foundations matter. "I've got it," I replied, placing the final chair. "Megan just called. She's running late. Some last-minute work crisis." "The life of a rising marketing executive," Mike said with a smile. After leaving Holloway Investments, Megan had thrived at the Burlington firm. 3 months in, she'd been promoted to senior marketing strategist. 2 months after that, she'd brought in a regional healthcare client that doubled the firm's revenue. Her professional rebirth had been remarkable to witness. Her personal journey had been equally impressive. Weekly therapy sessions had helped her recognize patterns from her relationship with Scott that she never wanted to repeat. She'd reconnected with old friends, developed new interests, and gradually rebuilt her sense of self-worth outside of anyone else's expectations. The divorce had been finalized last month, relatively smoothly given the circumstances. Scott, facing multiple legal issues and a damaged reputation, hadn't contested the settlement Megan's lawyer proposed. The Holloway family, once untouchable in Millfield, had experienced a spectacular fall from grace. Mayor Richard Holloway had officially resigned, citing health concerns but unable to escape the cloud of scandal surrounding his family. Scott had been removed from Holloway Investments following the discovery of additional financial irregularities, and Amber had returned to Chicago after her role in the scheme became public. Only Elizabeth Holloway had emerged with any dignity. As interim mayor, she had initiated a series of transparency measures for town governance and established a foundation supporting domestic violence survivors. Whether motivated by genuine remorse or image rehabilitation didn't matter much to me. The resources were helping people. My own work as victim advocacy coordinator had put me in contact with dozens of women and a few men trapped in situations similar to Megan's. The position that I'd initially accepted with reluctance had become a calling of sorts, a way to channel my investigative skills and protective instincts into something constructive. "Mom, sorry I'm late," Megan called, walking through the side gate with a large box. Mr. Whiskers trailed behind her on a harness and leash, a compromise that allowed him outdoor time while keeping him safe. I hugged her, noting the healthy glow of her skin, the confidence in her posture. "Just in time. The others should be arriving soon." "I brought the photo albums you asked for," she said, setting down the box. "Though I'm not sure why you wanted these ancient relics at my housewarming." "Because," I explained, "new beginnings are more meaningful when we remember the journey that brought us here." As guests began arriving, a mix of Megan's colleagues, her rediscovered friends, and a few supportive Millfield residents who had chosen relationship with Megan over loyalty to the Holloways, I watched my daughter move easily among them. She laughed genuinely, spoke with conviction, and no longer checked her phone compulsively, with the anxious look that had characterized her marriage. Jennifer Miller, now visiting regularly from Seattle, pulled me aside during the party. "I still can't believe the transformation," she said, watching Megan across the yard. When we reconnected, she was so hesitant, like she was asking permission to have opinions. "Now look at her." I nodded, understanding exactly what Jennifer meant. Megan before us wasn't just the Megan before Scott. She was a new version altogether, forged through difficulty into something stronger and more authentic. Later, as the gathering moved indoors when evening brought cooler temperatures, I found Megan in her kitchen, arranging desserts on a tray. "Happy?" I asked simply. "Getting there," she replied honestly. "Some days are harder than others. Still have moments when I doubt myself, when I hear Scott's voice in my head telling me I'm making the wrong choice or that I need his approval." She shrugged, But those moments are getting fewer and farther between. That's progress. It's more than that, she said, turning to face me fully. It's freedom. As the party wound down and guests departed, Megan opened the box of photo albums. We sat at her new dining table, Mike beside me, and flipped through images of her childhood and adolescence. Look at this one, I said, pointing to a photo of 13-year-old Megan standing proudly beside her science fair project. First place. You were so determined. I forgot about that, she murmured, studying the image. I wanted to be a marine biologist back then. You still could be, I pointed out. You're only 30. Plenty of time for another reinvention if you want it. She smiled, considering this. Maybe. Or maybe marketing is where I belong now. The point is, it's my choice. Mike excused himself to help the last remaining guests find their jackets, leaving Megan and me alone with the photos. I've been thinking about something, she said, closing the album. About why I stayed with Scott even when things got bad. I waited, giving her space to articulate thoughts she'd been processing for months. It wasn't just fear of losing status or financial security, she continued. It was shame. The idea of admitting that the perfect life I'd been projecting wasn't real. That I'd made a mistake. She looked up at me. I think I was more afraid of people saying, I told you? So than I was of Scott's anger. That's a common feeling, I assured her. We get invested in the narratives we create, even when they're hurting us. But you saw through it. You always did. I had the advantage of distance, I replied, and 26 years of watching people hide their truths. Megan reached for my hand. I never thanked you properly. For that day at the barbecue. For being willing to make yourself a target to protect me. You don't need to thank me for that, I said firmly. That's what love looks like, standing between someone you care about and whatever threatens them. She nodded, understanding filling her eyes. I think I'm finally learning the difference between love and control. Real love makes you more yourself, not less. As Mike returned and conversation shifted to lighter topics, I felt a sense of completion. The storm that had begun with Megan's late-night arrival at my door had finally passed, leaving behind not destruction, but renewal. Later that night, driving home with Mike, I broke a comfortable silence. I've been offered a position with the state attorney's office, expanding the victim advocacy program to 3 more counties. That sounds perfect for you, he said. Are you going to take it? I hadn't been sure until that very moment. Yes, I decided. I think I am. Because sometimes, the greatest justice isn't punishment for wrongdoing, but creating systems that prevent it in the first place. The work of transformation, personal and communal, never really ends. It just evolves into new beginnings. 1 year to the day after, Megan appeared on my doorstep with a split lip and shattered confidence. We stood together on the grounds of Millfield Park. The annual summer barbecue was in full swing around us, though it bore little resemblance to the event that had exposed the Holloway family's secrets. Under Elizabeth Holloway's continued leadership as mayor, she had won the special election with surprising support. The barbecue had been reimagined as a fundraiser for the Millfield Family Resource Center, which now occupied a floor of what had once been Holloway Investments headquarters. Strange to be back here, Megan remarked, sipping lemonade as we watched children play on the grass where her confrontation with Scott had unfolded. I wasn't sure I ever would be. Life has a way of bringing us full circle, replied, but never quite to the same place we started. Indeed, Millfield had transformed almost as dramatically as my daughter. The power vacuum left by the Holloway men had been filled not by another wealthy family, but by a coalition of community leaders with Elizabeth's surprisingly progressive guidance. The town's finances were more transparent, its politics less dynastic, its social hierarchies more permeable. Scott had left town shortly after the divorce was finalized, reportedly moving to Florida to work for a distant relative's real estate firm. His father had retreated to their lake house, his health genuinely compromised by the stress of his fall from power. Neither was missed. "Karen! Megan!" Elizabeth called, approaching with a tray of cookies. She had simplified her appearance over the past year. Less jewelry, more practical clothing, her formerly highlighted hair now naturally gray. "I'm so glad you both came." The 3 of us had developed an unlikely alliance. Not friendship, exactly, but mutual respect built on the recognition of how complicity and courage could exist within the same person. "The center looks wonderful," I commented. The family resource center had been Elizabeth's penance project, funded largely by her personal fortune. We're finally fully staffed, she replied with genuine enthusiasm. The legal aid clinic has helped 27 women file restraining orders this quarter alone. She looked directly at Megan. Your story made that possible. Megan nodded, accepting this truth without discomfort. She had eventually allowed her experience to be anonymized and included in the center's training materials, understanding that her pain could become protection for others. After Elizabeth moved on to greet other guests, Mike joined us, dressed casually in jeans and a button-down rather than his detective's usual attire. He had retired last month, deciding 30 years in law enforcement was enough. Now he was considering teaching criminal justice at the community college. Patricia Winters is telling everyone who'll listen that she always knew something wasn't right with Scott, he reported with a wry smile. Revisionist history at its finest, Megan laughed. The town gossip's suddenly enlightened perspective amused rather than hurt her these days. We settled at a picnic table, enjoying the simple pleasure of community without pretense. Megan's colleague Alexis joined us, bringing news about their latest project, a marketing campaign for a women's health initiative. The two had become close friends as well as successful collaborators. I submitted the graduate school application, Alexis mentioned casually, causing Megan to look up sharply. You didn't tell me. That's fantastic, Megan exclaimed. I raised an eyebrow questioningly. Marine biology, Megan explained. At Coastal University, part-time program designed for working professionals. She smiled at my surprised expression. You said it wasn't too late for another reinvention. Pride filled my chest. I did indeed. I'm not leaving marketing, she clarified, just expanding my horizons. The firm is supportive. They think having environmental expertise will help with our sustainability clients. And if it doesn't work out? Mike asked. Megan shrugged, unconcerned. Then I'll have learned something about what I do and don't want. Either way, it's my choice. She emphasized the final word, still savoring the freedom it represented. As afternoon stretched into evening, lanterns were lit around the park, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Elizabeth took to the microphone for the traditional mayoral address, but her speech focused on community resilience rather than political platitudes. A year ago, this town faced uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and the silence that enables harm, she acknowledged, her voice steady. Today, we're building something better from those difficult revelations. Megan squeezed my hand as we listened. The public acknowledgement meant something, even now. After the speech, as music started and some couples began dancing on the pavilion's wooden floor, I noticed Jennifer approaching with a tall, bearded man I didn't recognize. Megan, Karen, she greeted us warmly. This is David. He's a literature professor at Burlington College. Megan welcomed him easily, without the nervous deference to male authority that had characterized her interactions during her marriage. She was neither seeking approval nor avoiding attention, simply present and authentic. Later, as Mike and I swayed to a slow song under the lantern light, I watched Megan across the pavilion, deep in animated conversation with David, Jennifer, and Alexis. Her hands moved expressively as she made some point that had the others laughing. You did good, Mike murmured, following my gaze. She did good, I corrected. I just reminded her who she was when she forgot. As the evening wound down, Megan found me near the dessert table. I'm heading out, she said. Early meeting tomorrow about the coastal conservation account. Dinner on Sunday? I confirmed our standing arrangement. Absolutely. She hugged me tightly. Love you, Mom. Love you too, I replied, watching as she gathered her things, waved to several people, and walked confidently toward the parking lot. Alone but not lonely, independent but connected. I thought back to that terrible night a year ago. The frantic knocking, Megan's trembling form on my porch, the blood on her lip and fear in her eyes. The journey. From that moment to this one had been neither straight nor easy. There had been legal battles, financial adjustments, emotional setbacks, and the complicated process of rebuilding a life from its foundations. But watching her now, strong, purposeful, increasingly comfortable in her own skin, I knew with absolute certainty that the hardest night of her life had ultimately led to her most authentic days. Elizabeth joined me as I gathered my own belongings, the crowd thinning as families headed home. It's quite something, isn't it? She remarked. How completely life can change in a year. It is, I agreed, though the changes usually start long before we notice them. She nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. I've been thinking about what you told me once, about monsters wearing expensive suits and charming smiles. I remember. I've learned there's a corollary, she said thoughtfully. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes or carry badges. Sometimes they're just mothers who refuse to look away when their children are hurt. I accepted the compliment with a nod. And sometimes they're wives who finally find their voice after decades of silence. Elizabeth smiled slightly, acknowledging the reference to her own journey. Perhaps the most important thing is that we keep our eyes open, even when the truth is painful. Especially then, I agreed. As I drove home through the quiet streets of Millfield, I reflected on how a single moment of courage, opening my door at 1:03 in the morning, had rippled outward, transforming not just my daughter's life but an entire community's understanding of justice, power, and truth. Sometimes the most profound change begins with the simplest act, refusing to pretend that wrong is right, that cruelty is love, that control is protection. Sometimes in our darkest moments, all we really need is someone willing to turn on the light, and sometimes that someone must be us.